My name is Helena Park. I'm a captain in the United States Air Force, Logistics Command, Pacific Theater. I've led emergency extractions under fire, I've managed aircraft drop routes during blackout conditions, and I've qualified as an expert marksman 3 years running. I've been called a lot of things: dependable, too composed, intimidating. But no one had ever called me a bride until that day. It was my wedding, Coronado Base, a small, secure ceremony under a canopy of string lights and quiet wind. My husband, Raymond Keller, wore his full SEAL dress uniform. He looked like a damn statue carved out of conviction. Our guest list was modest: a few squad mates, mutual officers, my parents, my sister Violet, and a brother I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, Will. We'd just finished exchanging vows. The champagne had barely bubbled over the rim of our flutes when I noticed it. Sitting on the corner table, a gift box, medium-sized, wrapped in textured white paper, no tag, no ribbon, just 3 words printed in small serif font. To H, with love. It wasn't on the gift table. It wasn't there during the ceremony. It hadn't been there when I passed that exact spot less than 10 minutes earlier. I reached toward it without thinking. Habit, maybe, or instinct. Raymond caught my wrist midair. "Don't touch it." I turned to him, startled by the tension in his voice. "Why not?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he scanned the perimeter like someone just triggered a silent alarm. Then his voice dropped, cool, sharp, like steel through velvet. "You brought a threat into my home." My breath caught. I looked at him, then followed his line of sight. He wasn't looking at the box anymore. He was staring directly at Violet, my younger sister, who stood by the makeshift bar, swirling her wine glass with a slight smirk on her lips. That smirk disappeared when 4 of Raymond's SEAL teammates, men I'd barely spoken to, stood up in perfect unison. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The chatter dulled like someone turned down the volume on the entire room. Violet's eyes flicked to the box, then back to Raymond. And for the first time in years, I saw it. Fear, real, unpolished, reflexive. Not the kind you fake to get attention, the kind that says, "You weren't supposed to notice yet." I looked at Raymond again. His eyes hadn't moved. "Who sent that?" I whispered. "I think you already know," he replied. I did. And the sick part was, I wasn't even surprised. Raymond gave a subtle nod, and one of his teammates, Evans, I think, stepped forward. He wore formal attire, like the rest of the team, but his movements were anything but ceremonial. He scanned the box, ran a handheld detector around it, then lifted it gently with both hands and walked it toward the secured admin office adjacent to the chapel. No drama, no announcement, just protocol. The reception stumbled. A few guests exchanged awkward glances, but no one asked questions. Not in front of that many medals. I glanced back at Violet. She was gone. She must have slipped out while everyone's eyes were on the box. My stomach turned. Raymond returned to my side and said nothing. He didn't need to. His hand found mine and held it, not with warmth, but with precision, like anchoring me down. "Helena," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "You remember 4 months ago? Violet called late at night. You put her on speaker." I nodded slowly. "She was crying, said she was in some financial mess. Wanted you to store some documents for a couple of weeks. You said no. She begged. You still said no." I had. But it hadn't felt like a victory. Just one more boundary I hoped she wouldn't test again. Raymond exhaled through his nose. "I think that box is her plan B." A chill ran down my spine. Plan B. The backup plan in case I didn't play along. Send it straight to the wedding when I'm distracted, vulnerable, surrounded by people, unable to process or react without causing a scene. It was tactical, and it wasn't Will's style. It was hers. The calculated drama, the timing, the eyes watching. She wanted it to land when I couldn't say no, or worse, when saying no would mean ruining my own moment. I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. Texted Violet. "Where did you go?" No reply. I scrolled through her old messages. A dozen from the last few months. Harmless on the surface. Harmless unless you know the subtext. The passive-aggressive apologies. The half requests. The careful framing of guilt as love. I just want to be part of your new life. Can I send a little something your way soon? Just trust me. You've always been the strong one. That line again. I turned toward Raymond. She's trying to make it look like I'm involved. He nodded. That's why I stopped you from opening it. But why today? He looked at me for a long beat. Because today they thought you'd let your guard down. Today you're a bride, not an officer. I felt the corners of my mouth tighten. Not a smile, not rage, just something colder. We'll see about that, I said. I turned toward the admin room where the box was now under armed observation. One way or another, I was going to find out what Violet had tried to slip into my life, dressed up as a wedding gift. And for the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about vows. I was thinking about war. The thing about family is, they know exactly where your armor is weakest. Raymond once asked me if I thought my brother was dangerous. I told him no. Will wasn't violent, wasn't unpredictable in the way the military trained us to anticipate. But that was the problem. He was too predictable. Predictably selfish, predictably manipulative, predictably convincing when he needed something. He served for 5 years. Army Quartermaster Corps. Got discharged after a quiet investigation into missing base property and falsified delivery manifests. The official file says, dishonorable discharge due to administrative misconduct. The unofficial story? He was caught rerouting military-grade equipment to off-the-books buyers. He never went to prison. He never even apologized. Will said he was set up, said his CO didn't like him, said the system was rigged against people trying to get ahead. He always had a reason. I remember one call, a few months after his discharge. I was stationed at Hickam, mid-rotation, buried in end-of-quarter inventory. He said he needed my help. Just a PayPal account in your name, he said. Temporary. I can't use mine while they freeze my funds for review. You know how slow the system is. I hesitated, but he was ready for that. He always was. Told me he'd never ask for anything else. Said I was the only one in the family who had any real standing left. Said I was stable. That word again. Stable. It always meant the same thing in my family. Useful. I didn't say yes, not out loud. But I didn't say no fast enough either. A week later, I found out he'd created the account anyway, using my name, my email, an old address from when I lived off base in Georgia. He sent me a text. Don't worry, sis. Nothing shady. Just using your name to keep things above board. That contradiction haunted me for months. If it wasn't shady, why couldn't he use his own? I could have reported him, could have shut it down, but I didn't. I told myself it would blow over, that he'd delete it when he was done. Instead, I buried it. Deep. I never told Raymond, not until now. We were in the car, leaving the base after the wedding was cut short. The sunset over the bay looked like spilled copper. Raymond broke the silence first. Your brother ever borrow your name before? I didn't answer right away. The silence was my answer. He sighed, one hand on the wheel, one tapping his wedding band against the steering column. That wasn't temporary, he said. That was a blueprint. I turned to him. He used it again. He never stopped. You think people like Will ever quit when the first test run works? I felt the weight of something I'd tried to forget folding in on itself. The truth I'd buried had sprouted roots. Raymond parked the car outside our house. He didn't turn off the engine. He didn't need your permission this time, he said. Just your pattern. That stuck with me. My pattern. Because Will didn't just exploit my trust. He memorized how I forgave. How I froze when guilt got weaponized. How I never wanted to cause a scene, especially in front of people I had to salute the next day. He knew I wouldn't open that box in front of guests. He knew I wouldn't press charges without proof. He counted on my restraint. I got out of the car and walked straight to the filing cabinet in the corner of our den. Third drawer, old documents, sealed records, scanned tax returns. There it was, an email thread from 2 years ago. He'd asked for a copy of my W-2 just to help compare deductions. I'd sent it. No watermark, no encryption, just a PDF. And that was the first domino. I printed it again. Placed it on the counter next to our coffee pot. Raymond joined me, picked it up, scanned the subject line. He's not careless, I said quietly. He's calculating. He plays the long game. One name, one favor, one borrowed file at a time. Raymond nodded. He plays small until he gets big enough to disappear. We stood there in silence, two veterans, side by side, not on a battlefield, but in our own damn kitchen, tracing the breadcrumbs of betrayal. And for the first time in years, I felt something heavier than shame. I felt ready. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of adrenaline or fear, but because my mind wouldn't stop spinning possibilities. At 0600 the next morning, I walked into the NCIS office on base. The agent in charge, Special Agent Nichols, had already received the box from the admin team. He was calm, methodical, and polite, but his eyes never smiled. He sat me down in a small room with a metal table and a single manila folder. He slid it toward me. "We scanned the USB," he said. "You might want to take a look." I opened the folder. What I saw made my fingers stiffen. 3 forged invoices with my name printed on top. A scanned image of my signature, almost perfect. But the pressure curve was off. And then a contract, dated 2 weeks ago, between Helena Park Holdings and an import-export supplier based in Florida. "What the hell is this?" I asked. "That's what we're hoping you can help us figure out," he replied. My eyes skimmed the pages again. My name, in bold. My military ID number, partially redacted. Even my current station code. Raymond stood behind me, silent until now. "They've been using you like a vault," he said. "Quiet, sealed, and easy to blame." I looked at him. "How did they get this info?" "You gave it to them," Raymond said. "Piece by piece, over years. They've been stockpiling your credibility." It hit me like a slap I saw coming too late. That tax return from 2 years ago. The email with my military title in the footer. The copy of my lease agreement I sent to Violet when she was proving residency for a job. Every favor had been a chisel, carving out the shape of a person I never consented to become. I turned back to Nichols. "Can we trace the IPs that access this file?" He nodded. "Already in progress, but it gets worse." He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. A payment ledger, a wire transfer. $10,000 routed through a checking account under H Park Holdings, sent from a shell corporation named Everbright Logistics. The funds had been used to purchase a shipment of ceramic artwork, the exact description used on the box delivered to my wedding. "This isn't just forgery," Nichols said. "This is commerce fraud. They used you as a face for a laundering operation. That box wasn't a gift. It was a delivery confirmation." I didn't speak for a full minute. It made sense now. The timing, the smirk on Violet's face, the unspoken weight in Raymond's grip when he stopped me from opening the box. "Why the wedding?" I asked finally. Raymond answered for him. "Because they knew today you'd let your guard down." He wasn't accusing me. He was stating a fact. And he was right. They didn't pick a random day. They picked the one day I wouldn't question a surprise. The one day people expected me to smile and nod and say, "Thank you." They used my trust like a fuse. Agent Nichols spoke again. "We've already flagged the account. We'll freeze the assets by EOD, but you need to be prepared, Lieutenant. There's a possibility someone inside your family built this over time. Not impulsive, not accidental." That part, I already knew. Raymond leaned in. "This is the point where most people start spiraling," he said quietly. "But I need you to do the opposite." I looked up at him. "I'm not spiraling," I said. "I'm recalibrating." Because I wasn't just angry, I was awake. Every red flag I'd ignored had become paperwork. Every delayed boundary had turned into a weapon. Every silence had been a yes I never meant to give. They didn't just steal my name. They used it to build a version of me that could be blamed, discredited, and discarded. All while I stood in a white dress, promising forever to the one man who actually saw it coming. I folded the forged contract and pushed it back to Nichols. "What's the next step?" He looked impressed. "Next step? You file an official statement, claim identity fraud, and we open a federal inquiry." Raymond rested a hand on my shoulder. "You ready for that?" I nodded. I wasn't ready for the box, but I'm ready for what comes after. Because this time, I wasn't going to be the vault. I was going to be the breach. I've been trained to follow trails, logistics trails, supply chains, personnel movement. I know how to trace fuel shipments across oceans and reconstruct the failure points in mission logistics. But I never thought I'd be tracking signatures made to look like mine. That morning, I stood in the NCIS evidence review room with a stack of documents I'd gathered overnight. Bank forms, lease agreements, military applications, anything that had my actual signature. I placed them on the table, facing Special Agent Nichols. "I want you to have everything," I said. "Compare it all. I have nothing to hide." He glanced at Raymond, who stood behind me like a stone wall. Then he nodded, slid the documents closer, and began flipping through them. "We already ran the forged signature through digital enhancement," Nichols said. "It's precise, but there's no pressure variation. It was lifted, not written." I knew what that meant. It was scanned and digitally placed. That meant the origin point was electronic, and I had a long digital footprint. My heart sank as I remembered something. I reached into my phone and opened the archived folder of old emails. 6 months back, late February. An email from Violet, short and seemingly harmless. "Hey sis, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. I'll be sending you a few little things soon. Nothing serious. Don't worry about it. XOXO." At the time, I didn't answer. I was in the middle of a relocation. We'd just wrapped a rotation in Guam. I barely noticed the message. But now I saw it for what it was. A prelude. A signal. Not affection, but intent. She had been planting markers, giving herself an alibi cloaked in sentiment. I showed the message to Nichols. He read it, then looked back at me. "She ever follow up on this?" "No." "Then this might be one of the earliest indicators we have." He printed it, labeled it, and slid it into the evidence sleeve. Raymond was silent until then. "She's not sloppy," he said. "She just thought we wouldn't dig deep." He wasn't wrong. Violet had always hidden behind charm and just enough chaos to pass off manipulation as confusion. But this wasn't confusion. This was a structure, a deliberate fraud operation. Nichols continued flipping through the real signatures I'd provided. He circled 2, then turned his laptop screen to face me. He had the forged documents open, side by side with my verified files. "You see that?" he asked. "The forged ones don't have any micro-staggering. Your real signatures have rhythm, slight tremors, pressure points. These don't. They're clean because they were copied." He looked up. "Lieutenant Park, you're not a suspect. You're a source." The word struck deeper than I expected. Not a suspect, a source. In other words, I'd become a witness to my own identity being used as a smokescreen, and it made sense. My access, my clearance, my military reputation, it all made me the perfect cover. Not because I was corruptible, but because I was reliable. Because no one would question a Park file. Because I played by the book, and people who play by the book don't usually notice when the book has been rewritten around them. Nichols began drafting the first official complaint to the Financial Cyber Unit. Meanwhile, I turned to my own laptop and began building a timeline. Every message, every call, every odd request from Violet or Will. Every moment I'd brushed off because I didn't want to believe the worst. It was strange, seeing your own name on something criminal. Knowing it wasn't you, but it looked like you. Felt like being framed by your own ghost. I added the email from Violet to the timeline. Labeled it, "Emotional Grooming Attempt, Feb 22. That's what it was. That's what it had always been. A slow drip of guilt and intimacy until you were too numb to scream. Raymond pulled out a printed sheet he'd prepared the night before. It was a map, not of geography, but of relationships. Names, arrows, dates, red lines connecting moments, and money. He pointed to a name circled near the bottom, Everbright Logistics. "That's the one we need to crack open," he said. "If they're shipping through that label, there's a paper trail." I nodded, took a deep breath. The hunter in me, the officer who could reverse engineer enemy movement from a fuel manifest, was back. Only this time, the battlefield wasn't overseas. It was blood, and it was personal. We weren't just proving my innocence. We were tracing a criminal network that had been hiding behind my face, and I was done being their blind spot. The more we dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-off. The wedding box wasn't the first. It wasn't even the boldest. It was just the first one that failed. 3 days into the investigation, the NCIS cyber team traced digital shipment records linked to H. Park Holdings. Most of the payments and documentation had been routed through a warehouse near Long Beach. Nothing fancy. Just one of those industrial storage and forwarding facilities with 30 identical units, and an underpaid night clerk who didn't ask questions. According to their ledger, 3 previous shipments had been processed under my name over the past 6 months. 1 to Nevada, 1 to Miami, 1 internationally, sent to Seoul under the label Ceramic Display Samples. Raymond and I didn't wait for permission. We drove down that same afternoon. The facility looked like every other logistics hub I'd inspected over the years. Chain-link perimeter, corrugated steel units, a front office with dusty blinds, and a scent of reheated burritos. I stepped inside while Raymond stayed in the car, coordinating with Nichols remotely. The woman behind the desk looked up. "You the one from Park Holdings?" I didn't answer the question directly. "I'm here about Unit 24B. I'd like to review the outbound manifest records from the last 90 days. She shrugged and handed me a printed log. Low resistance. She didn't get paid enough to care who asked what. I flipped through page after page until I found it. Date: March 3rd. Sender: Helena Park Holdings. Destination: Everbright Consolidated, Reno, NV. Package contents: ceramic artifacts. Value: $6,400. Digital confirmation: yes. Signed for by H. Park. Scanned signature. Same forged signature. Same pattern. Same shell company. But what froze me wasn't the paperwork. It was the footnote in the delivery notes. Scheduled by V. Carter, Violet Carter. She hadn't even bothered to use a pseudonym. I looked up at the clerk. "Do you keep CCTV footage?" "If it hasn't been wiped, yeah, we got a month's worth still on the drive." "Can I see March 3rd? 10 minutes later, I was watching a black and white feed on a flickering monitor. And there she was, Violet, standing in the loading bay, wearing sunglasses indoors, hair tied in a messy bun, holding a clipboard. She spoke to the driver, pointed at the box, identical in size and wrapped to the one delivered at my wedding, and smiled. That same performative charm she'd mastered since high school debate team. And suddenly, it clicked. All those years, I'd thought Will was the dangerous one. He was reckless, impulsive. He ran scams that collapsed as quickly as they started. But this was architecture. This was staged. Dressed-up sabotage in soft tones and familial signatures. The box hadn't come from Will. It came from Violet. She used my name. She used my wedding. And worse, she used my history with Will to distract me from what she was doing right under my nose. A micro-twist, buried in plain sight. I'd suspected Will because he had a track record. But Violet had something else. My trust. She never needed to break the door down. She walked through it while I was holding it open. I called Raymond from the car. "It wasn't him," I said. He didn't ask who I meant. He said, "Violet?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see. She orchestrated it all, the shipments, the account. Will might have helped, but she's the one steering. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "That explains the smirk." I stared out the windshield, watching warehouse workers move pallets without urgency. The world kept turning like nothing had changed, except for me. I wasn't just chasing a paper trail anymore. I was watching it burn while the arsonist held the match with my initials on it. Raymond's voice broke through my thoughts. "What do you want to do next?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "We start with the IP logs. Every login, every schedule submission, every traceable mouse click. And then we build a case not just around stolen identity, but intentional sabotage of a federal officer's record." He didn't say anything right away, just breathed through the phone. Then, "You're not doing this alone." I didn't smile, but I felt something settle into place, like loading a fresh magazine. The box wasn't the first, but it was going to be the last. Growing up, I believed our family had a system. Not a perfect one, but a system. You work hard, you stay quiet, you show up when it counts. You don't embarrass each other in public, and you never air your pain where neighbors might hear. That system got me through basic, through deployments, through separation and reintegration and command. But what it didn't prepare me for was betrayal from inside the walls. I asked my parents to meet me the week after the investigation deepened. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I just said I needed to talk, in person. We met at a quiet diner near their neighborhood. One of those places with vinyl booths and laminated menus that hadn't changed since 1982. The walls smelled like burnt toast and old syrup. My mother arrived first. My father followed 5 minutes later. No hug, just a nod from both. Their eyes scanned me the way you'd check a stranger who looked familiar. I slid the manila folder across the table. Inside, 3 shipment manifests, screenshots of forged accounts, and the image of Violet at the warehouse. My mother didn't open it. My father barely glanced at it. "We're not sure what you want us to say," my mother said quietly. I tried to keep my voice even. "I want to know when you found out." She hesitated. That pause said more than words ever could. Finally, she spoke. "Will and Violet said you knew. They said you agreed months ago." I blinked. "Agreed?" She nodded. "They told us it was a business arrangement, that it helped you with military logistics on the side. We didn't ask too many questions." "And that didn't seem strange to you?" My father shifted in his seat. "They said it was classified. We thought maybe it was something covert, something you weren't allowed to talk about." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You thought I was using a fake corporation under my own name to run black market shipments across state lines. And your reaction was to nod and let it happen." My mother looked down at the table. "We didn't want to insult you." "No." They didn't want the discomfort of challenging the story. They didn't want to risk discovering something that might require action. They didn't protect me. They just hoped I'd survive the fallout. I leaned back. My appetite had left the moment I walked in, but now it was replaced by something colder. "You know what hurts?" I said. "I didn't come here to accuse. I came to find out if any part of my family could still tell the truth." My father finally looked up. "You think we knew everything?" he said. "We didn't. Maybe we should have, but we didn't." I shook my head. "You didn't ask because deep down you didn't want to know? Because knowing would mean choosing." He didn't respond. I stood up. "I've spent my entire life defending people who couldn't defend themselves. I've worn the flag on my chest while being questioned, dismissed, and underestimated. But I always knew my orders. I always had structure." I pointed toward the folder. "But this is what happens when family chooses comfort over clarity, when silence becomes the only currency." My mother reached for my hand. I pulled it back. "I'll let the investigators finish their work. I'm not here to argue anymore." There was a moment where none of us moved. Then I added softer. "I would have forgiven you for being tricked. I won't forgive you for pretending it wasn't happening." I turned to walk out. My mother's voice followed behind me, barely a whisper. "We thought you were stronger than this." I stopped at the door. "I am. That's why I'm walking away." And I did. Out of the diner, into the dry morning air, past the row of parked cars. It was the first time in my life I realized, sometimes, strength isn't staying in the room. It's choosing to leave before someone else rewrites your story for you. I didn't need another meeting. What I needed was a reckoning. And I had just begun. The room was colder than I expected. NCIS had converted a former admin office into an interview space. Gray walls, no windows. A single metal table bolted to the ground like truth couldn't be trusted to stand on its own. I stood behind the two-way mirror for a moment before they called me in. Violet was already there. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, arms folded, hair perfectly done like this was brunch, not a federal inquiry. But the dark circles under her eyes betrayed something deeper. Fatigue, fear, maybe recognition of the hole she'd dug and could no longer climb out of. I stepped in. No uniform, just plain black slacks and a white blouse. Still military, just not regulation. She looked up, and for the first time since the wedding, she said my name. "Helena." I didn't respond. Just sat down across from her. A silence hung in the air, thick with everything unspoken, and then she cracked first. "You always had the strength," Violet said, her voice soft. "I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" That word rang like an insult. I leaned forward, keeping my tone flat. "Understand what, Violet? That you used my name, my record, my trust, to run logistics scams. That you waited until my wedding day, to use a box as a delivery token for a money trail?" She didn't answer, just looked away. Her mascara was too perfect to be accidental. She'd come here prepared, for drama, for pity. So I cut that off. "You thought strength meant silence," I said. "That because I kept my head down and handled things, I'd handle this too. But that's not strength." She looked back at me. Then what is? Strength means I finally speak. She blinked fast, twice. Then the tears came. They weren't loud or theatrical, just slow, streaming lines that caught the edge of her jaw before falling off. Part of me wanted to reach across the table. The big sister instinct still lived in some corner of me, buried beneath layers of betrayal. But I didn't move. I let the silence sit. She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. I was scared, she said. Will said we'd never pull it off unless it looked clean. And your name? It opened everything. I stared at her. Do you know how many clearances I had to earn to wear that name? Do you know how many checks I've passed? How many nights I spent on base when the rest of you were celebrating birthdays and promotions? She bit her lip. It was just supposed to be one shipment. I laughed. Not out of humor, more like a reflex. One shipment? That was her line? You forged 3 international documents. That's a felony even without using a federal officer's credentials. I didn't think they'd trace it back to you. And yet, here we are. She looked down. For a moment, she was quiet again. Then came the question I expected, but still hated hearing. Can you fix it? I exhaled slowly. You want me to lie to federal investigators and claim you had my permission? She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. Her silence was the loudest thing in that room, so I told her the truth. No? Her head shot up. I can't, I said. Because the moment I fix this for you, I become you. I become the kind of person who thinks silence is protection. And I've spent too long earning my integrity to throw it away now. She sniffed. Another tear slid down, but I stayed where I was. You don't understand, she whispered. Will's already flipped. He's pinning it all on me. I nodded once. Then maybe it's time you stop being the victim of your own schemes. The door opened behind me. It was the agent signaling time was up. I stood. Violet looked up at me again, this time with something almost like pleading. Helena, please, don't hate me. I looked her in the eyes. I don't hate you, I said. I just don't trust you, and that's worse. I walked out without looking back. She could cry, she could beg. But this time, the story wasn't hers to narrate. It was mine, and I was done letting anyone else write it for me. There's a strange kind of silence in a legal office, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from pressure. The walls are lined with shelves of rules, regulations, precedents, and policies, each one capable of protecting or destroying a name, depending on how it's used. I sat across from the senior attorney at the Naval Legal Service office, my back straight, the manila folder of evidence resting between us like a loaded weapon. I had spent the last week compiling everything, every real signature, every fake one, the timeline of the shipments, the screenshots, the CCTV image of Violet, the digital fingerprints that traced logins to my name from her devices. He opened the folder, adjusting his glasses. You've been busy, Lieutenant. I've had some help, I replied, thinking of Raymond and the NCIS team. But I needed to make sure no detail was left to question. He took his time, flipping page by page. I watched him scan, absorb, annotate. When he reached the last image, the security footage of Violet at the warehouse, he stopped, set down his pen, and exhaled. This isn't just fraud, he said quietly. It's conspiracy. And given your active duty status, it may cross into federal endangerment. My hands rested on the table, palms flat. I want to file formal charges, I said. Forgery, identity theft, and anything else your office deems applicable. He nodded slowly. We'll need to build a case file from scratch, but you've done most of the groundwork already. These documents alone are enough to initiate proceedings. I handed him the flash drive next. It held video interviews, the IP logs, and financial transfers linked to H Park Holdings. I'd labeled everything clearly, chronologically. Years of military logistics had trained me to think in systems, and now I was using that same precision to tear down the system that had stolen my name. He plugged it in without a word. This part, I said, tapping the page that held the bank statement with my signature forged on a transfer slip, was the hardest to see. He raised an eyebrow. It was the one thing I thought they'd never touch, I continued. My financial record, my reputation. They could manipulate family ties. They could lie. But this was me, on paper, and they made it theirs. He nodded again, slower this time. You'd be surprised how often betrayal comes wrapped in familiarity. But I will say this. Most people in your position never bring it this far. They're too afraid of what it'll cost them. I've already paid, I said, my voice sharp. I paid when I walked away from my parents. I paid when I sat across from my sister in an interrogation room and watched her pretend it was all a misunderstanding. I paid when I woke up the morning after my wedding, not thinking about love, but about liability. The lawyer didn't try to offer comfort. That wasn't his role. Instead, he gave me something better. Accountability. Then let's get started, he said. We'll open an internal case with JAG, then coordinate with DOJ on the civilian charges. This won't be quick, but it'll be clean. That was all I needed. Not revenge, not even apology, just clean lines, clear definitions. My name reattached to the truth instead of someone else's agenda. As I signed the first affidavit, I noticed my hand was steady. No tremor, no second guessing. It struck me then. This was how I took back what they'd stolen. Not by yelling, not by collapsing, but by documenting, by demanding, by making their betrayal an official record that would never be erased. When I finished, I looked up at the attorney. Is it strange, I asked, that I don't feel satisfied yet? He shook his head. Justice isn't about satisfaction, it's about correction. Satisfaction will come later, when the system does its job. I stood to leave, tucking the now lighter folder under my arm. Outside, the base air felt different. Not softer, just less heavy. I wasn't the girl who kept her head down anymore. I was the woman who rewrote her own name, one document at a time. I returned to base 2 days after filing the charges. There wasn't a memo or a formal alert, just eyes. Quiet, watchful, and calculated. The kind of stares that didn't accuse, but waited for you to confirm the worst. The NCIS investigation hadn't named names, but someone had leaked a version of it. A base bulletin had gone out under the guise of financial conduct awareness. A single paragraph stood out among the usual reminders about spending limits and ethics training. It read, "Recent internal inquiries have been initiated concerning fraudulent activity, potentially linked to an active duty officer's name being misused in illicit transfers. Cooperation is ongoing." They didn't need to say my name. Not when I was the only officer on base who'd recently been married. The only one whose civilian family had ever interacted with military logistics. By noon, the hallway chatter had disappeared. Conversations paused when I walked by. People nodded stiffly, avoided eye contact, or chose to take the longer way around. I wasn't invisible. I was radioactive. I sat through 2 briefings like a ghost. Nobody asked questions when I spoke. Nobody interrupted me either. It was like they couldn't decide whether I was a liability or a lesson. The turning point came that afternoon in the mess hall. I had chosen a table in the far corner, not to hide, just to breathe. A tray of untouched chicken and rice sat in front of me. My appetite was gone, but the routine still mattered. A young airman walked up, couldn't have been older than 22. He wore his uniform like it still felt foreign on his shoulders. I didn't know his name, just recognized him from my logistics class 2 months back. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Ma'am," I looked up. "Is it true?" he asked, eyes unsure. "About the fraud stuff?" The silence around us sharpened. Every nearby table went quiet. I could have shut him down, told him it wasn't his place, redirected him to the chain of command. But that would have been a coward's exit. And I'd spent too long being silent for someone else's comfort, so I nodded once. "It's true they used my name," I said. "It's also true I'm taking it back." He blinked. It wasn't the answer he expected, but it was one he understood. "Thanks, ma'am," he said softly. Then, after a beat, "We've been taught integrity is action. Good to see it in real time." He walked off, didn't stay, didn't linger to gawk or whisper, just left me with something heavier than shame, responsibility. And oddly, that moment anchored me. Because even as the rest of the room returned to its meal, something had shifted. A truth had landed, quietly but firmly, in the middle of rumor and assumption. I didn't control the whispers. I never would. But I could control my posture, my choices, my answers. That evening, I stayed late in the logistics office, reviewed the routing systems, rechecked access logs. Every task was a ritual, a way to remind myself that this uniform still meant something, that my name, though bruised, was not broken. Before leaving, I stood for a moment at the bulletin board by the exit. Someone had pinned up the same notice from earlier, highlighted sections and all. I stared at it for a long time. Then I pulled a pen from my pocket, stepped forward, and added a line beneath it in block letters. Your name is only as strong as what you're willing to defend. I didn't sign it, didn't need to. By morning, they'd know. Let them talk. Let them watch. Because I wasn't done fighting. And I wasn't finished reclaiming everything they thought they could take. Coronado's training field was alive with the kind of motion that only elite discipline could produce. Controlled, precise, almost theatrical in its intensity. From a distance, it could be mistaken for chaos. But I knew better. Every pivot, every call, every movement was born from structure. Raymond stood near the obstacle course perimeter, clipboard in hand, barking instructions to 2 junior SEALs mid-sprint. His posture was the same as it was in combat zones, alert, assertive, but never overcompensating. That steadiness was what had drawn me to him in the first place. I waited until the interval whistle blew before I approached. He turned as if he already knew I was behind him. Got a minute? I asked. He gave a small nod, handed the clipboard to his XO, and motioned toward the perimeter fence where the roar of training dulled into wind and ocean. We stood side by side for a moment, not speaking. I pulled the envelope from my uniform jacket. A simple form inside, change of emergency contact. I handed it to him. I removed them, I said. All of them. He didn't open the envelope, just held it. I'm not sure they'd even pick up the phone if it rang, I added. But I needed it on paper, for my record, for me. Raymond finally looked at me. His eyes didn't waver. I never doubted you, he said. Not once. My jaw tightened, not from anger, but something closer to grief. Then why did it feel like you pulled away? He was quiet for a beat. Because I needed to know, he said. If you doubted yourself. I blinked. What? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Helena, I've watched soldiers lose everything because they spent too long trying to protect people who wouldn't protect them back. I've seen what misplaced loyalty does to good officers. It rots them from the inside. I swallowed hard. He wasn't being cruel. He was being precise. You mean you were testing me? No, he said. I was giving you space to choose. Those words hit harder than any accusation ever could. I didn't marry a woman who lets blood ties override what's right. I married a woman who stares down a problem and doesn't blink, even when it's wearing her last name. My throat felt tight, but I kept my voice steady. I thought cutting them off would feel vindictive, like I was proving them right. He shook his head. No. You're proving you've got a spine and a memory. Loyalty isn't about who you share DNA with. It's about who you can count on when the weight drops. I let the silence linger. Finally, I said, it still feels like a loss. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. It is a loss, he agreed, but not of you. It's the loss of a fantasy. That maybe one day they'd come around. That they'd change. I nodded. And now I know they won't. He folded the form once, placed it in his back pocket. You did the right thing, even if no one else understands it. I didn't do it for them, I said. I did it so I could look at myself and not flinch. Raymond smiled, just slightly. There she is. I looked away toward the horizon, where the ocean met the base fence line. The air smelled like sea salt and dusted sweat. Then I turned back to him. Raymond? Yeah? If I hadn't stopped it in time, if the documents had gone through, if they'd tied me to the transfers. They didn't, he interrupted. But if they had, I'd have stood by you, he said without pause. But I would have expected you to fight. That was his love, not coddling, not promises of unconditional belief, but the insistence that I remain who I was, even in the fire, and I loved him for that. Behind us, the whistle blew again. I should get back, he said. I nodded. I'll walk with you. We moved together toward the training area, not as husband and wife, but as 2 soldiers who understood the quiet violence of paperwork, the sharp edges of betrayal, and the cold, steady redemption of doing what's right, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Courtrooms aren't like they are in movies. No gavel slamming, no shouting. Just fluorescent lights, creaking chairs, and voices that carry more weight when they're quiet. The federal hearing was held in a civilian courthouse downtown, beige and unremarkable, the kind of building you pass every day without realizing lives are reshaped inside it. I wore my service uniform, not out of pride, but clarity. I wanted no confusion about who I was, or who I wasn't. Violet sat to the left of the courtroom in a navy blue suit, not orange. She had accepted a plea deal. 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of identity theft, 2 counts of conspiracy. The prosecution agreed to drop additional charges in exchange for full cooperation. She pled guilty. Her voice was steady, even rehearsed. She never looked at me. The judge acknowledged her cooperation. No prison time, just probation, mandatory restitution, and her name sealed into the digital record of federal fraud. A future of denied loans, denied security clearances, background checks that would always raise eyebrows. When the gavel fell softly on her deal, I didn't feel victory, just closure. Then came Will. He had been extradited from Nevada 2 weeks prior. The marshals brought him in late, wrists in cuffs, chin held too high, still posturing, still thinking he could charm his way out. That confidence had always worked on our parents, on old girlfriends, on oblivious employers, but not here. He didn't get a deal. He tried, but the prosecutors had already secured Violet's confession. They didn't need him anymore. He pled not guilty. It didn't matter. The evidence was airtight. Emails, transfers, recorded phone calls. One in particular where he laughed and said, "She won't even notice. Helena's too busy saving the world to notice a couple of zeros missing." The judge was less forgiving. 18 months in a federal facility, plus full restitution. Not the kind of sentence that makes headlines, but enough. Enough to mark him permanently. After the sentencing, I stepped into the hallway outside the courtroom, heels echoing on the marble floor. Raymond was there waiting, arms crossed, leaning against the wall. He didn't speak, just nodded. Then a special agent from NCIS approached, clipboard in hand. "Lieutenant Park," he said, extending a form. "This is formal confirmation that you are no longer under any form of surveillance or internal review. We appreciate your cooperation." I signed it without ceremony, the final page in a story that never should have started. As he walked away, I looked down at the signature line beneath my name. I traced it with my finger, not out of vanity, but recognition. They tried to forge this, tried to make me disappear behind it, but I was still here. Raymond and I stepped outside. The sun was sharp, dry heat, the kind that sticks to your skin. We walked down the steps in silence. When we reached the sidewalk, he turned to me. "How do you feel?" I shrugged. "Tired, clean, not relieved, not angry, just clean." He gave a small laugh. "You sound like you just finished a deployment." "In a way, I did." He nodded, then asked, "Any regrets?" I thought about it. "Not revenge," I said. "Just correction." He looked at me, eyes steady. "They'll carry this forever." "I know," I said, "but so will I. The difference is, mine's printed on court documents. Theirs, it's burned into who they are." We started walking again. I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like someone who had done the work, quietly, painfully, completely. The kind of work no one applauds, but everyone benefits from. We passed a coffee shop, a street musician playing soft jazz, a mother pushing a stroller. The world kept moving. And so would I, because what they stole wasn't just my name. It was my narrative. And now I had taken it back, without noise, without blood, without giving up who I was. Not revenge, just correction. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real letter on soft cream stationery, the handwriting unmistakably hers. My mother had always written in slanted script, elegant and sharp at the same time, like someone who wanted the world to know she still believed in beauty, even if she couldn't control it. It had no return address, just my name written in full, Lieutenant Helena Park. I opened it slowly, unsure what I was bracing for, defensiveness, excuses, or maybe silence disguised as sentimentality. Instead, it read, "We didn't know, but we let it happen. We saw the patterns, the money, the favors, and we chose to believe it was harmless, because believing the truth meant accepting what Will and Violet had become. It meant admitting we'd raised them that way. We hope you can forgive us. And if you can't yet, we understand. Mom. There were no tears, just a long breath, a pause, and then stillness. I didn't write back. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. Forgiveness is a strange kind of silence. It doesn't demand a response. It just softens the corners of the room, makes things easier to carry. That night, I sat in my living room, the letter folded beside me, and let my mind drift back. Not to the courtroom, not to the wedding, not even to the training field, but to a driveway in Virginia. Summer, age 13. Violet had broken the rear window of Dad's truck, throwing a rock in some impulsive tantrum she couldn't explain. It was loud. Glass rained everywhere. She froze, panicked. I was inside. I heard it. I saw her through the screen door, her hands trembling. And without a second thought, I walked outside and told Dad it had been me. I took the blame, took the grounding, missed the field trip that weekend. Violet cried and hugged me behind the garage. Later that night, when Dad had calmed down, Mom came into my room and sat at the edge of the bed. She didn't ask questions. She just whispered, "You've always been the strong one." I remember nodding, believing it was something to be proud of. But now, decades later, I see the flaw. Strength isn't silence. It isn't bearing the weight of others' mistakes to keep the peace. It isn't giving your name away like it's just another shield to hold. Strength is boundaries. Strength is refusing to be used, even by those who say they love you. I stood up from the couch, walked to the bookshelf, and placed the letter in a small wooden box. The one that held my academy pin, Raymond's first deployment photo, and the coin I received after my first classified operation overseas. Artifacts of transformation. That's what the letter was now. Not a wound, not a scar, but an artifact. Raymond came home an hour later, sweaty and sunburnt from outdoor drills. "You okay?" he asked as he dropped his gear by the door. I nodded. "My mother wrote." He raised an eyebrow. "Did she apologize?" "In her own way." "Are you going to respond?" "I don't think I need to." He walked over, sat beside me, and read my expression like he always could. "Good," he said quietly, "because not all answers come in words." We sat together in silence, the kind that feels earned, the kind that doesn't require fixing. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere, another letter might be written, another apology drafted. But I wasn't waiting for it. I had already reclaimed my name, my peace, and my voice. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I owed anyone, but it was the freedom I gave myself. I hadn't touched the kitchen since the wedding, not because I couldn't bear it, just because it had fallen into a strange kind of stasis, like a room sealed off in a museum, intact, undisturbed, waiting for a time traveler to walk in and ask what happened here. The countertop still had a faint shimmer of champagne residue near the sink. The decorative cake knives, never used, sat in their box. A single navy napkin, one of Raymond's SEAL team had stuffed into his jacket pocket during the toast, had been returned and folded on the counter like a forgotten flag. And on the far end, near the bar cart, we had set the gift table. That's where it had been. The box. The one that unraveled it all. I took a deep breath, tied my hair back, and started wiping down surfaces. Not aggressively, just with quiet focus. Like I was reclaiming square footage. Not just from the event, but from what lingered after. Under the far cabinet, I found a glass ring from a drink Violet must have set down. I scrubbed at it, watching it disappear. And then, tucked behind the spice rack, just where the wall dips slightly from poor construction, I found a folded note, thin, almost weightless. To H. With love. My breath hitched. It was in Violet's handwriting. The card was simple, cream, no decoration, just those 5 words in looping blue ink. For a moment, I didn't move, just held it there in my palm, suddenly very aware of the way light filtered through the blinds, leaving angled bars across the counter. I didn't need to open it. I didn't need to read whatever sentiment had been printed inside, if any. Because this was their idea of love, a box that could have buried me, a box wrapped with a ribbon and sealed with the assumption that I would stay silent, that I'd play the strong sister again, the one who absorbs and endures. But I wasn't her anymore. I turned on the oven. Not for dinner. I pulled out the lower drawer, removed the unused broiler tray, and placed the note inside. When the flame caught, it didn't roar, it didn't sizzle, it simply folded into itself, like a memory collapsing. I stood there, arms crossed, watching it curl and vanish, not out of rage, but because it was time. Behind me, the front door clicked. Raymond stepped into the hallway, kicked off his boots, and called out, "Helena?" "In the kitchen," I said, without raising my voice. He walked in, pausing as he saw the cleaner, emptier surfaces. "You didn't have to do this," he said gently. "I know." He noticed the faint whiff of paper smoke in the air. I didn't explain it. He didn't ask. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. I wiped my hands on a cloth, set it down, and looked up at him. "Not okay," I said quietly, "just clear." His expression softened. That's all he needed. He walked over, kissed my temple, and said, "Clear is good." And it was, because clarity doesn't mean you're healed. It doesn't mean the betrayal vanishes, or the trust grows back overnight. It just means the fog has lifted. You see things as they are. You stop romanticizing the people who hurt you. You stop rehearsing speeches they'll never listen to. You stop waiting for a different past. The kitchen was clean now, not perfect, not untouched, but ready. And so was I. It came through at 0600, not a knock, not a phone call, just a ping in my inbox. Subject line, personnel status update. My heart didn't race. That surprised me. I opened it with the same calm precision I used to dismantle a sidearm. Efficient, clean, no ceremony. There were no apologies in the message, no explanations, no acknowledgement that for months my name had sat in limbo, that my career, built on years of discipline, risk, and sacrifice, had been paused because someone else borrowed my signature. All it said was this: status, active consideration. That was it. No confetti, no, "we regret the delay." Just 3 words that slid into my morning like a forgotten appointment suddenly revived. I sat back in the chair, letting the glow of the monitor wash over my face. My name wasn't cleared by a parade. It wasn't restored by fanfare. It was restored in silence, quiet, official, and irreversible. I hit print. The laser hummed gently as the page slid out. I held it up to the light for a moment, then folded it carefully and tucked it into the file I kept in my nightstand. The one marked, Private, Lieutenant Helena Park. Inside that folder were certifications, deployment records, commendations, and my commissioning letter. That folder had survived 3 moves, 1 flood, and now, this. I closed the drawer. The decision wasn't final. Active consideration wasn't a promotion. It wasn't even a guarantee. But it was proof the system remembered me again, not as collateral damage, not as a risk profile, but as a candidate, a name worth reviewing. That afternoon, I went to the base gym. I ran 5 miles on the treadmill, not because I had to, but because my body still remembered the rhythm of discipline, the hum of clarity. When the past month had felt chaotic, movement made sense. Afterward, I showered, changed into uniform, and headed to the squadron admin office. The sergeant behind the desk blinked as I stepped in. "Ma'am," he said, standing a little straighter. "Just here to update my packet," I said, sliding the printout toward him. He scanned it. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the screen. "Understood." He typed something. I watched the status bar on his monitor move, like a digital exhale. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. There, pinned to the corkboard outside his office, were rows of staff photos. Names, ranks, commendations. Mine was there, 2nd row, neutral background, strong eyes. For weeks I had imagined it coming down, quietly removed while the investigations dragged on, like a ghost fading from view. But it was still there, still me. I reached out, adjusted it slightly, one corner had started to curl, and walked away. That night, Raymond grilled steaks out on the patio. The scent of rosemary and heat drifted into the living room as I filled out a journal entry. I didn't usually write longhand, but some things needed ink. I wrote, "They used my name because they thought it was silent, because they thought it was easy to twist. They thought I wouldn't fight, but I did. I am." Raymond walked in holding 2 plates. "You're smiling," I hadn't realized I was. Promotion boards back on, I said simply. He didn't ask for more, just handed me the plate and raised his glass. To active consideration, he said. To owning it, I replied. We clinked. No toast, just steel in our eyes. I had never chased medals. I didn't count rank as identity. But there was something sacred about knowing your record was your own again. That your name could stand alone on paper and not require defense. No asterisk, no footnote. Just Helena Park, Lieutenant, United States Air Force, still standing, still rising. It was late Sunday afternoon. The kind of California light that falls gently across your skin, like it's been softened by everything the week had already taken from you. Raymond and I sat on the wooden bench in our backyard, the one he built from scratch when we first moved in. The cedar had faded into something silvery and honest, like it had aged just enough to stop trying to impress anyone. We didn't talk much, just sat. He had a beer, I had a mug of mint tea, and silence filled the spaces between us like it belonged there. For a long time, I didn't know how to sit still, not like this. I'd always been wired for alertness, for forward motion. That military switch that keeps your spine straight, your answers sharp, and your eyes scanning for the threat behind the door. But now, I let my shoulders drop. The wind moved the trees. I watched a finch hop along the edge of the garden bed, utterly uninterested in me. I envied that. Raymond glanced over. You okay? I nodded slowly, then said, You know, I thought I'd feel vindicated, like I won something, like justice should feel loud, maybe even triumphant. And I took a sip. Let the warmth sit under my tongue. What I feel is something else, I said. It's like air, like I'm not carrying it anymore. He leaned back, smile soft. That's peace. And you earned it. We sat with that. The weight of the last few months had come in waves. Grief, betrayal, anger, exhaustion. But this was something new. Lighter. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of war. My war, at least. It hadn't been fought with fists or fury. It was waged with forms, files, facts, with refusal, with silence, with refusal to stay silent. They had tried to use my steadiness against me, my discipline, my reliability, my absence of spectacle. But I didn't crack. I didn't scream. I didn't unwrap their gift. And that changed everything. I turned toward Raymond. You never asked me to explain it all. He looked out at the sky. Didn't need to. I saw it in your eyes. There was comfort in that. In a love that didn't demand performance, that saw the storm inside you and still chose to anchor. Behind us, the sun dipped just enough to stain the porch in amber. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime played a fractured tune. I closed my eyes for a moment, and then, with a quiet breath, I stood. Come on, I said. Let's cook something. I feel like we earned real food tonight. He followed me inside, and as the door closed, I looked over my shoulder, one last glance at the bench, the trees, the hush that had settled over it all. And I smiled. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you do isn't speaking out. It's not fighting back. It's choosing to stand still in the quiet and not run from it. They sent me a box of lies, but I didn't unwrap it. And that one act rewrote everything. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.